obviously back in January, Zen officially announced that they were leaving the band. Um, Look, was the writing on the wall with that one? Like, how long have you been kind of preparing for that news? Did you see this one coming?
Um, yes and no. I guess the reality is if you go back to, April 2023, um, at that point, we would never have considered that the band would have existed without Zen, to be honest. I remember during the pandemic, during a pretty difficult time with the world and the band and everything in life, I remember Zen and I talking about how, one way or another, we always thought that we would be the last two guys standing, whatever
Mm,
happens with the band. But I guess, lives change, people change, priorities change. And I guess what happened over time was while Zen was taking time out to focus on some, personal stuff that was important and essential for him, I guess we got to have this practice run of what it would be like to have someone else filling in that slot, and we were very fortunate to be able to get James Dorton, who some of our fans would know from Black Crown Initiate, on board for that tour in May 2023. And if we had have had more notice for that tour, like I said, had have told us 3 months out, maybe we would have just cancelled the tour. But on 10 days out, we had no choice because we'd already spent all the money and
mm,
everything was booked and paid for. And if we cancelled, it would have been kind of financial ruin for the band. And so we roped in James, and then we were really surprised that, almost overwhelmingly the comments we got from every show was that, wow, that was absolutely incredible. Bit different, without Zen, or I'd still love to see Zen, but that was still amazing. And so we were really kind of encouraged by that to make sure that we could still follow through with our plans to do the world tour we had planned, and then basically just say to Zen, hey, come back whenever you're ready. And look, I guess, what are we now? It's, April 2025. I remember having a chat with Zen. It was, I think, January 2024, so about a year before he left the band, where he was thinking about leaving.
mm,
And then after taking a couple of weeks to think about it, he decided, no, 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 I want to come back. I can't come back right now, but later this year. And it was going to be the second half of last year. And then the second half of last year came around and it got delayed and it got delayed again. And when 12 months later, I remember we were having literally the same chat that
mm,
we'd had a year ago. Some of the same things were being discussed. And, I guess it's not that easy or not a quick thing to decide to leave a band that you helped start
mm,
21 years ago. And so, we were happy to give him that time and have it to be his decision. And yet at the same time, having that with that decision being made, because we'd already spent almost 2 years on the road with James, we knew we had a ready-made replacement and that the band was in good hands.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I liked the way there was a particular phrase in a, a Zen statement that I really liked about, how he just kind of lost his passion for all the crap that comes with touring and, the 23 hours of waiting around. Yeah, and
Yeah.
all I could think of was Henry Rollins, because people have been trying to ask Henry, like, hey, would you get back on stage with Black Flag? And he's like, he's like, you know what? Being on stage with a microphone in my hand, that's cool. Being the hairy dudes at the airport with the laminates and all their baggage and they look really tired, that I don't miss. And I was like, yeah, man, I touring life would drive me insane. I don't know how you guys do it. Like I like a
Yeah.
little bit of routine. The way you guys live your life would be fucking torture to me. So I get it. Like
Yeah. Well, and that's something that Zen and I discussed because he was basically saying, like he said in his statement, that essentially touring was kind of his least favorite part of being
Hmm,
in a band. Whereas for me, it's actually my favorite part, the performing aspect, being up on stage.
hmm,
I love that so much that I'm willing to put up with other stuff because that time on stage is such a precious thing to me. And
yeah.
because we've always been a band that loves to tour and loves to do a lot, we're not, a sort of more of a studio band. And so, Zen knew that wasn't really possible
Mm.
for us with the way we've always done things. And so, yeah, but it's definitely not for everyone. But we do have a group of guys in the band that are willing to put up with a lot of stuff for this music that we love and to try to share it with lots of people, which is a fun thing to do.
Yeah, I was in the. I've just gotten out of the military after 11 years, so I'm well aware of having to like stuff your entire life into a bag and just go. But yeah, I'll stay here.
Yeah, the funny thing with that, right, is that people will think that you leave on a tour for 3 weeks, 5 weeks, 7 weeks. It doesn't matter. We all take a carry-on suitcase or a backpack, and
Mm,
that's our personal belongings. Because coming from Australia, like we can't take a suitcase. Like we gotta use the luggage allowance for the airline. We use that on our gear.
yeah,
And
wow,
so we don't
true.
we don't have anything left. So literally we're taking backpacks and you take about a week worth of clothes and then you just have to try to get to hopefully some venues, if you're playing some nice places, have a laundry. If not, once a week or on a day off, you're going down to a local laundromat in whatever city, whatever country you're in. And yeah, and that's just kind of the way you have to make it work.
And then you've got dickheads up the back, like me, going, "Oh, look, he's wearing his own merch," and you're like, "Fuck you, Tom! I haven't had a shower, and all my clothes are dirty."
Yeah, uh, I that's definitely our guitarist, Matt,
Yeah.
who, if Matt is up to washing day and he isn't able to do the washing, he'll just grab one of our t-shirts. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'm just taking a comp from merch." So I've run out of t-shirts. Whereas I always have a bit more of a philosophy that once other people start wearing your merch, it's not cool to wear your own merch anymore. So I have a few of our t-shirts as souvenirs, but I never wear them. But a few of the guys do, and a lot of it is for that reason.
Well, the funny thing is, I'm such a goddamn hypocrite. As much as I'll sit there and be like, "Oh, he's wearing his own merch," I've literally been wearing the same Sense Music Media shirt, so our shirt, to gigs. I've literally wear nothing but that shirt for the last 3 years, and so I have no right to call anyone a hypocrite. But the reason I wear it is because I'm 6'7", and on the back of it it says, "Tonight's tall guy in front of you is brought to you by Sense Music Media," and it has been the greatest advertising tool I've ever had.
That sounds like a great idea. Good marketing tool for sure.
um, Mate, so how did you? So a bit of background on me, by the way, because this recent announcement was really cool. So I grew up in Tasmania, and my first ever show, first ever indoor gig, I had just turned 18, was Blood Duster, touring the album in
Yes.
2004 at the Batman Faulkner Inn in Launceston, and one of the supports was Psychroptic, with the with Chalky on vocals. So this is how far back this
Yeah.
went. But I literally have scars under this arm from the last time I saw Psychroptic live, and I was crowd surfing, got dropped on a broken bottle. So me and Psychroptic go back a bit, man. How did you choose these fucking absolute dead set legends to be your supports?
Well, you actually said it yourself because they are dead set legends. I mean, uh, of the Australian scene, they are, you know, um, they have been one of the best bands in the Australian metal scene for 20 years. When we first started as a band, we started in 2003. Our first ever show was 2006. And, they were just starting to really pick up around then. I remember when their Observant album came out, I think it was 2008, you know, for the scene of, death and extreme metal, they were the biggest band in the country at the
Mm,
time. And it was inspiring to see them traveling around the world because at that point, there was actually barely any Australian metal bands that toured internationally. Like you
mm,
go back 20 years ago and it was like Psychroptic and Parkway Drive, and occasionally, one or two, a band would get over somewhere once. to do
Mm.
something. But as far as bands that were regularly touring overseas, Psychroptic were really leading the way for bands like us. They were one of the bands that we were aspiring to open up for. In 2008, I think it was, we opened for them in Melbourne and Canberra on a couple of shows. And, and we were so stoked to be able to play with them because they are just such an incredible band. Dave and Joe Haley are just one of the tightest rhythm sections that you could ever find. And we're just huge fans. And so it's one of those things where we've actually only ever played with Psychroptic at those couple of shows 17 years ago. We've never done a full tour together. And, the last couple of Australian tours, we've had some fantastic international acts, supporting us.
Mm.
But we really thought it would be a great chance this time to get, one of the best Australian metal bands out there and team up with them. And we've been really thrilled to see how excited everyone is for the combination, because it's obviously, a couple of Australian metal bands that, haven't done this together before, and it should be a really great combination.
Yeah. It got me thinking while thinking about the Haley brothers and the Abbott brothers from Pantera and stuff like that. These brother and the brother, two brothers in one band. Why is it always one drummer and one guitarist? Do you notice it's never two drummers in the same family? You reckon it's because their parents go make music together, just bugger off?
You know what? I obviously I don't know the story for Joe and Dave specifically, but I guess if you want to form your own band, then it's like, hey, well, I'm already doing this. You should do something else so we can jam together.
Particularly in Tassie when there was this bugger all people. Yeah.
Yes, they made very good choices though, because obviously Dave Haley is one of the best extreme metal drummers in the world. I know he was a big inspiration for Dan when Dan was starting out learning drumming, and still has been for a long time. And Joe is just incredibly tight. It's just such a pleasure to watch them.
I love too that they can, like something like Crisis Act that they do with Youngie. Like King Parrot are one of my favorite Australian bands. I fucking love them to bits. So when Crisis Act came out, I was like, what is this? And as Youngie was saying, these guys can write an album like that in about 5 minutes because they're that talented. They're just like, the riffs that those two could come up with in their sleep are better than most people, most people can do when they're awake.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good way to put it.
Are they doing a nice set, or are you making them like giving them the old six songs and fuck off treatment?
Oh no, we'll fit in as much as we can. I mean, obviously there's some time limitations because we're doing a 2-hour show and 2 albums. But it's also why on some other tours, I think the 2019 tour, we had about 5 bands all up on the bill, and this one's a little bit more condensed so that we can make sure that the night is just what do they say, all killer, no filler. So definitely the idea with this tour.
Well, speaking of, because you're coming out with a nice big fat set, so you're playing obviously the new album Exul, is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
Yep. And Mighty Citadel. Now, obviously, for the sake of the interview, I'm going to ask a dumb question. Why are these albums?
Yeah, so I guess the Citadel album idea came about because last year was the 10th anniversary of the record Citadel, and as part of that, we decided to remaster the album. We'd always felt like the mix for that record was we always felt that the mix for that record, even though it was really, really high quality, we wished it was just a touch heavier, a little bit different. And we learned so much on Earn and Exul working with Mark Lewis. We basically went back to him and said, hey, can you remaster Citadel and give it a little bit of your flair to kind of bring it a bit more into the way we like to sound these days? And when we were looking at re-releasing that record, we thought, well, what if we do that album in full as part of a tour? But then that album's actually pretty short. It's only about 45 minutes. And our headline shows are normally 90, 100 minutes anyways. And I kind of had the idea of, well, what if we did Exul as well? It's our new album. It's been our most successful album. we really love every song. And we thought that would make it a really special event. And a lot of the Citadel stuff, we haven't played some of those songs in Australia for many, many years. Like we haven't played Painters of Tempest in full, which is, 23-minute, three-part song. We haven't played that in Australia since I think 2015 or 2016. So it's been a really long time. And we thought, you know what, it'd be a really great thing to revisit, this record, give our fans something special, but also it's something that's really fun for us because, we get to present these songs in a way that, like with Citadel, we haven't done since the album came out. And then Exul was designed in the way it was written to flow start to finish. And so being able to present that album in full start to finish as well, it was been a really special thing. And, we did this exact set list in Europe for a headline tour there in October. And essentially, it was because that was so well received, because that tour was so successful, that we decided, okay, we got to bring this to Australia as well.
Okay. Pardon the improvised question. This literally just came to me as we were talking about remastering. Like, I would absolutely love the ability to go back and just get some of my favorite albums that I grew up with and just sit there and just start twiddling the knobs and moving things around. It got me thinking, if you could, not albums that you've made, I mean just albums that you grew up with, albums that you're really familiar with. Is there an album that you know of that you would love to just chuck back in the mixing board and just make a few changes?
Oh, that's a tough question. I guess, look, the reality is that when you go back to some older records, or sometimes for records that are bands like first or second albums, you notice the difference. So, I guess just an example of one thing that comes to mind is a band like As LA Dying, their Frail Words Collapse record. If you listen to that compared to a cut 2 or 3 records later, the songs are great. That's maybe my favorite record of theirs, but the production is not as good as the later ones. And so I guess there's probably a ton of examples like that of bands who, either the album is really old or it was their first album or two, and either production techniques weren't as good back then, or maybe they didn't have as much money. That's often the way with bands' first or second records. But it's definitely the case with, especially older records, where if the production's not great, the energy of the songwriting cannot come across as well sometimes. Now, if you know the song back to front and you've seen the song live, sometimes the production doesn't matter as much. But if you're hearing a song for the first time and the production, the mix isn't really good, then it just might not connect with you. And that's why it's so important, because you want to make sure that the energy of the music, the composition, is coming through to the listener easily. You don't want the listener to have to use their imagination to tell that it's a good song, to tell that it's really well written, to tell that can make them feel something. So that's where this sort of thing is so important. On the other hand, I would say that every album is a moment in time, and you don't want to change too much, especially when it comes to things like performances and stuff like that. Like, for me, I'm a much better singer than I was, when with the band first started. And I personally enjoy listening to my vocals more on the newer stuff than the early stuff. But at the same time, that's still an accurate reflection of the people we were then. It's this special moment in time that's kind of captured in like a time capsule.
Are you ready to hear some absolute just metal heresy? You ready for this? Ready for an opinion that's going to make you go, oh, first it was the white shirt and now this. All right, so I was born in 85. So I was coming up all the music that I first heard was 90s, 90s production. And obviously, there was a massive difference in production styles between 80s and 90s albums. When I was growing up, Metallica were a rock band. I had never heard any of the thrash stuff, so they were the guys that put out Load and Fuel, and Reload. Fuel, man, yeah, cool. Um, and so the first time I ever heard Master of Puppets was on their Symphony of Metallica album. And I think that version is better than the 80s original, because when I first heard the 80s original years later, I was like, well, this sounds a bit flat. Where's the violins? Told you,
Hey,
heresy.
hey, well, you're talking to a violinist, so
Yeah.
uh, if anyone's gonna to feel you on that one, I will. I mean, it's interesting you bring up that record because, for me, like the first metal song I ever heard actually was One by Metallica, maybe about 93. I was about 11. And then basically straight after that, they brought out the Load Reload records. And for me, discovering, strings in heavy metal, I think the S&M record by Metallica, which came out, I think it was, maybe about 98, 99, something
99, I
like
believe.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember buying that on VHS, and absolutely loving it and loving, that for me, I was the classical violin nerd and the metal kid at the same time. I was like both
Mm,
those kids in high school. And so that record was kind of the combination of that. And I hadn't heard that before, and so it was that. And then about the same time, I discovered Apocalyptica and, then started realizing that, oh, hey, there you can actually do some of this stuff with metal, because I wanted to be a professional violinist. That's what I wanted to do. But every weekend I wanted to go out and see shows. I was just everything I listened to at that time was, punk, hardcore, and metal, and I just loved all of that, those different types of alternative musics.
yeah. Um, this is going to sound a bit random, and I realize that cello and a violin are completely different. However, my 8-year-old son has recently started playing the cello, and of course doesn't know his asshole from his elbow with it. Obviously he's learning how to play an instrument. But I'm just wondering, just from someone who you also uses a bow to play their instrument, what do you have any kind of tips or tricks, or maybe advice for some, that I could maybe give him?
I think that the best advice when it comes to learning a string instrument is to make sure you have a qualified teacher that you have weekly lessons with,
No.
and that you focus on uh, consistent practice over like quantity of time. So
Mm,
especially with beginners, I've taught violin to kids for many, many years in the past. And, just doing 10 minutes a day, 5, 6 days a week for many years, eventually that 5, 10 minutes turns into 15, 20, 30 just naturally. So
mm,
the focus doesn't have to be on practicing long periods of time. It's just getting the instrument out. And I guess one thing I would advise to maybe parents like yourself is having the instrument out and readily available
mm,
is something that can really make it easier for kids to just pick up the instrument just on their own volition. Their cello sitting there in the corner. They just feel like, oh, maybe I'll just play something for a minute, and they can
mm,
just go pick it up instead of it being like this big deal of, oh, I've got to get it out of the case and I've got to do this and that. But it's just the consistency over time, because string instruments are hard and they're
mm.
not something that you can do in a short period of time. But I think they're so rewarding, and cello is such a beautiful instrument. And when you put the time of a number of years into these instruments, I think it's possible to make some really special music.
Tim, this has been rad, man. Thank you very much for your time today, dude. Exul, I was just exploring Exul before. Oh my God, dude, it sounds incredible. So well done. These shows should be awesome, dudes. And yeah, really looking forward to seeing you guys in Psychroptic. So I'll see you in Brisbane, whenever that show is.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll see you. I think it's June 15 at the Princess Theatre. We absolutely can't wait. It's going to be amazing. Our fans in Australia are incredible, have supported us for so long, and yeah, and we're just incredibly excited to finally get back. It's been too
Oh,
long.
love it, man. All right, mate. See you then. Be
All right.
good.
Thanks very much, Tom.